Connor Williamson, Special Subject Investigation, and I'll be talking about is there any need for broadcast radio. So the first thing I want to ask is, does anyone in this room actually listen to broadcast radio?
Yeah.
Me?
So whereabouts do you listen to it? In the car? What about you two?
Car.
At home.
Just at home. So you have a radio and you just turn it on? And
Both car and home.
right, okay. Well, I asked around, and most of the people said the only time they listen to the radio is either in the car or in a shop where they have no control over it whatsoever. So at that point, you can replace both of those forms of music and drama, and we'll be looking back through the history of radio and how it's adapted to where we have it today and how we can replace it. So in 1890, the first piece of data was sent using radio waves. And this was huge, but no one actually believed it happened. The belief was that, in fact, all they'd done is cause electromagnetic induction, which is just changing voltages. But for about 30 seconds, we had white noise sending from one place to another. And then, in 1914 to 1918, World War I happened. So at the hands of America, they had to advance radio so that they could communicate between squads without them going, hey! And then the Germans seeing them, they'd draw attention to themselves really quickly. So America advanced it to the point where we could send your voice back and forth, but it wasn't massively clear and there was still errors with it. By 1920, the radio has reached civilians because we have the ability to play music through it, but it wasn't smooth by any means. It was just like you'd hear one song and then like a 10-second break and then another song and then another 10-second break and then another song. And in Scotland, a guy called John Logie Baird invented telecommunication vision, which was another way of using radio waves to send information. And he sent monochromatic picture to a little screen, and we now call that television, and obviously that's adapted. But he thought that he might be able to send audio with it as well, and at the same time, at the time that he had, he just could never get it to work. In 1945, the end of World War II. So television has become more popular. People have money now from being in the army and through business and all the rest of it. And so TV now has sound. You can now hear what is going on with the people. So the news doesn't just consist of some guy holding up flashcards. So they can actually talk and play, have a picture. But people still use radio more often than TV because TV is expensive. At this point, you had to choose whether you wanted a car or a television. Now over here, that's not, nowadays it's not the same kind of idea. A car is way more expensive than a new flat screen TV. So to try and profit off of this, the BBC introduced something called the radio license, which was charging for the privilege to listen to BBC Radio 1 and 2. And at this point it was about £8-ish, which was 25 quid in today's money, to listen to the radio. And this was just a way of the BBC fleecing everyone down, and they got the government's permission to do it. And Winston Churchill ignores TV because no one has it, everyone has radio. And the radio license hasn't come out at this point during World War II. So Winston Churchill talks to his people using the radio. It's the fastest way to communicate with more people. In the 50s and 60s, colour TV comes out, which makes black and white TV a lot cheaper. So more people go out and buy that, which is a massive hit to radio. But radio came back with something called The Archers, which is, to this day, the longest running soap opera in history. Since 1951, January the 1st, it has not missed a single day. It's been running 15 minutes every day. I think at this point, as a producer, I've killed myself and run out of all of the material possible. But radio also has pop culture. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, The Who. Pop culture is exploding. Everyone has all this music that everyone wants to listen to, and people like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones didn't want to go onto the television because that's not where most of their fan base was. They wanted to be on the radio where everyone else is. Go to the 70s and 80s and the radio license is removed, but replaced with the TV license because everyone has a TV now. So a lot of working class people thought, I'm not going to bother with a TV. What's the point in spending loads of money on a TV and then having to pay extra to watch it, and I can just stick with the radio and nothing change. But I watched a documentary with Bob Geldof, and Live Aid, one of the biggest broadcasted events at that time, had 3 times more radio listeners than TV views, which is huge. Like, you never hear about how many radio listens it had, and all the parties that people threw, and all the barbecues and everything that people had just listening to the music that they, you know, they don't get to see live because they don't have the money, so they just stick on radio and have a barbecue, I guess. In 1992, BBC and Swedish radio station created something called DAB. It was a way of transmitting clearer audio signals. It's just digital, it's basically like analog, but it's played at a higher amplitude so that clearer signal comes through and you get less crackle and less interference. But they didn't tell anyone about it, and they didn't tell anyone that you'd have to change your radio to pick it up. So by 1998, they were wondering why no one was listening to the 6 extra radio stations and why the listeners of Archers had stopped. Because they moved the Archers from BBC Radio 1 to Radio 4 and not told anyone about it. And then when everyone went, hang on a minute, where'd it go? The BBC thought, you know what? What they want is an extra 3 minutes shaved off of it. So instead of it being 15 minutes long now at this point, they cut it down to 12. At that point, they lost a lot of listeners, and BBC Radio took a massive hit. They also launched a digital TV channel, which only lasted until 1996. The channel was called BBC Choice. And again, no one really knew about it because they hadn't really told everyone, and found themselves scratching their heads as to why it was such a massive fail. In 2000, the internet comes out. Sure, at the beginning of the 2000s, it's dial-up and it's really slow and clunky, but by the time you get to 2010, you've got fiber optic internet and all the rest of it. You've got any song that you want, any video you want, it is at your fingertips. And with Samsung turning around and saying, hang on a minute, I want to be able to connect to wherever I am, you can pull out your phone and, oh look, there's the internet, you know? And that kind of power just kind of thought, well, why should I sit and listen to some guy play songs he wants to listen to when I can just go on my phone or on my computer? I want to listen to, let's say, the Libertines. Well, he's not going to play that. I'll listen to it on my computer instead. And that kind of affected how people consumed music and video and everything. And so radio took a massive, massive hit with the birth of the internet. Not to mention, a guy called Rupert Murdoch starts a company called Sky, with over 1,000 TV channels and 1,000 radio stations. Now at this point, people only really were used to 5 TV channels, I think at most. So if someone turns around to you and says you can watch TV live from anywhere in the world, and then turns ABC on from America and is watching some sitcom, that's mind-blowing to people over here at this point. All they've had is BBC 1, 2, ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5. So at this point, we're now spoiled for choice, and with radio stations all being connected to DAB, you can connect anywhere in the world. And just to see that, I went onto my Virgin Media box at home, right, and flicked through. I can get all of the radio stations from Southeast Asia, America, Canada, South America, and Russia from my Virgin Media box. I can't understand a bloody word of it, but I can get it all. 2010. So BBC threatens to close one of its radio stations, BBC Radio 6, which is supposedly the radio station for music lovers. So they say that they can't afford to fund it anymore and that they have to close it down. And in a response of 50,000 emails and 250,000 letters, everyone saying, if you close that down, there will be absolute uproar, right? They decided maybe we should keep this. You know, clearly it's a massive part of people's lives. We can't just get rid of it. So, in July 2010, they kept it, and Lauren Laverne and Phil Jupiters kept their jobs as radio presenters. But the BBC needed to bring in new talent, new listeners, and the way to do that is to take people that are on the internet and bring them to the radio. And a way of doing that was take YouTubers that have won awards and give them their own radio show. And the first people to do that were Dan Howell and Phil Lester, also known as Dan Is Not On Fire and Amazing Phil, were given an hour-long radio show on a Monday night and told that they could keep that for a year, and at the end of the year, if they hadn't pulled in enough listeners, that they'd go back to being YouTubers, and they agreed to it. 4 years later, they still have that radio station because they won awards in the first 6 months of listenership. Because when they asked them what time they wanted, they said, well, most of our listeners, or most of our viewers, are between 12 and 19. So we're going to go for the time when they're coming home from school. So we'll take the 3 till 4 show. And they were like, yeah, all right. So at that point, all the kids that are watching them on YouTube get in the car and go, put BBC Radio 1 on, they've got all of those listeners back. So that was the way that they did that, but they didn't just stop with Phil and Dan, they took two other people, Jack and Dean, and brought them in to see what they could do, because they were two completely different, they were a completely different style of comedy on YouTube. But internet streaming takes off. Things like Spotify, Last.fm, people aren't listening to the radio anymore, because the radio's spontaneous, isn't it? You could go from listening to, I don't know, Motionless in White and Asking Alexandria to at any moment just swap to Alter Bridge. And generally people that listen to those kind of music are going to listen to that. And it's that kind of continuity doesn't really stand out. So if you turn around to Spotify and say, right, okay, well, I listen to this, what it does is it cross-references that with people that have a similar listening history, and then what they then listen to, and then cross-references that with things in the same genre, and then says, well, maybe you like this. It's not a foolproof system. I have seen many people search Asking Alexandria, and it goes, oh, you're listening to this, maybe you'd like to listen to One Direction. It's not a foolproof system, it still has its flaws, but it's getting a lot better. And to give you an idea as to how big the internet streaming became between 2010 and 2014, Beats Radio, a radio streaming service that I didn't even know existed, and Dr. Dre claimed it was the one thing that made him popular. He was not going to sell Beats Radio for anything. But he sold the entire company Beats for $4 billion to Apple and took a quarter of that for himself. Now, since signing to Apple, he's been sued 4 times, twice by Bose, once by Monster, and once by HP, right, for all of the patents that he then sold to Apple. And all they wanted was a little piece of coding that he had a patent on for his little radio streaming service that they wanted for iTunes. They paid $4 billion for a piece of coding that's probably about that big in size 12 font.
Jack and Dean off of YouTube have a new show on Radio 1. It starts Monday night at 9 o'clock. It's one of a lot of YouTubers are doing a series for Radio 1. 9 o'clock Monday night is your first show. Are you excited?
Yeah, very excited. Although right now I'm a bit scared. It looks like I'm on the set of Dexter.
It is Dexter, isn't it?
Yeah.
You can watch this online. A lot of your fans will be at school or college, but they'll be able to watch the video later, so it's all absolutely fine. Obviously, you know about Innuendo Bingo. You'll hear a bit of innuendo from the TV or radio, which people send in to me. You put a lot of water in your mouth. Try and spray it out rather than spill.
Otherwise you'll just be all over yourself.
Looks better on camera.
Although Dean is wearing swimming shorts today.
Yeah, you are.
He's come prepared.
Very good. Stop playing music and let me listen to Dean's voice, says Hayley in West Yorkshire.
Brilliant. Thanks, Hayley.
The fans are on.
I must have my glasses off, actually.
Go for it.
Yeah.
Also, Vinny from Norfolk says, I cannot wait to see Jack and Dean on Bingo. It's going to happen right now. Let us know if you're watching today. Tweet at BBCL1. Text 81199. Alright lads, so all over each other rather than the bin, please. That's just for show.
Yeah.
Please don't swear, because the water can be quite cold, and when it first hits you, it's quite a shock.
Okay.
Okay, so Jack and Dean are on. Innuendo Bingo. Get online. Watch this. We start with our favourite clip from Tuesday, and it's Undercover Boss. Now this lady really... Got your water there?
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
This lady really does have everything in her handbag.
Judy isn't just the public face of the garage. She's totally devoted to the cause. And it's not lipstick she carries in her handbag.
And if you pull it out, it's double-ended.
All fine?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. There is also a no hands rule. So if it comes out, it's going over the other person. Or you can mess yourself if you want.
If you pull it out, it's double-ended.
There we are. Alright. You can swallow if you want. You can get yourself a refill.
Steel, that was.
There we are.
That. Stowing.
Thanks. Thanks to Ben for that one. Of course, talking about the double-ended screwdriver there on Undercover Boss. I'd like a bit of water at some point. I mean, I know that was the first one. No hands! And now, over to Countryfile. And it's always interesting to hear about the different tasks you have to do on a farm. But I've never been on a farm, but I didn't know this was one of the jobs.
Okay, should we give him a wash then? Give him a wash. What do you reckon, Bull? I've washed lots of bulls in my time, but never a chicken.
That's just one of the features that Jack and Dean kind of like brought to the table when they were producers for them. So, as I said, some of the replacements for listening to the radio in your car. So, Volvo and Mercedes are two car companies that are working on connecting your car to 4G internet. And for £5 a month, you can like stream whatever at 60 meg download speed. So that means that you could get Spotify, Last.fm, iTunes straight to your car using the center console. And even if you couldn't, your phone does, and you could take an auxiliary cable and plug it straight into the speakers. Anyway, so at that point you've got all of the music that you would have on your phone or on your iPod or anything like that, and it goes straight into your car. Unless we forget CDs as well. They might seem a little outdated and stuff like that, but a lot of cars aren't brand spanking new, and they're not gonna. I think every single car still being made still comes with a CD player, and I know in my car the 3 albums that never leave are Coldplay's XY, Jamiroquai's High Times, and Black Crowes Southern Harmony and Music Companion. And there's just 3 albums that no matter where you're going, if the radio just gets a little bit dull and tedious, you just stick one of those on and just listen to it on loop or just keep swapping them over. And it's just, I think a lot of people kind of forget that cars still play CDs. I know a friend of mine has never used the CD player in his car, ever. He just connects his phone straight to it and streams off of iTunes and stuff like that. So, yeah, a couple of the replacements. Not to mention as well, internet can be streamed straight, news can be streamed straight to your phone, and Google Maps, if you have any Android phone, changes your navigation and sat-nav depending on the traffic using trilateration of everyone else's phones. Now, in 2011, the BBC did something that everyone thought was a bit of a shoot yourself in the foot, and that's they cancelled broadcasting the Formula 1. And their excuse was that they could take that money that Bernie Ecclestone was fleecing them down of and fund BBC World News. Now, that's for third world countries that don't have TV, that don't have the internet. The only thing they might have is a little mono speaker that runs off of a 9-volt battery, and they need that to kind of know about what's going on in the world. So imagine in Afghanistan, if you've got no forms of news at all, and you're trying to survive, it'd probably be useful to know where the insurgents are going and what's going on in your country at that time. Not to mention in Africa, they do it for earthquakes, tornadoes, dust storms. It's broadcast in 250 different third world countries as a means of helping the public that don't have any other means of getting information. So for us, if we found out that such a celebrity had died, you Google it, and then there's a million different responses in 0.00054 seconds, and that kind of news is just, we hear something, I tailor-make the news. My phone instantly downloads sound-on-sound PDF documents to my phone. So, I mean, that goes to show the power that we have, and these people don't have it at all. This comes back to when we were in World War I. We didn't have any other forms of, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have TV. So we had to rely on the news to, on the radio to give us news and things like that. So this is basically how they're living. We're 70, 80 odd years ahead of these people. There's no saying that these people will stay like this forever, but for the time being, BBC World News is the only way that they get any form of information. And other first world countries is not unsuccessful in other countries. So in South Korea, they actually praise the radio. How we have TV and we'll sit there through our thousands of channels and we'll say there's nothing on. Well, at that point, they turn the TV off and turn the radio on because they have some of their favourite celebrities hosting TV shows, not TV shows, radio shows, and there's always something on. And I was talking to my grandmother, and she says that they actually have a schedule. Like over here, you might say, oh, well, I know Wednesday's a night for Supernatural, and 8 out of 10 Cats is on a Friday. Well, they know when every radio show is on and every presenter is on and what music is played and at what time, so that they can tune in and know exactly what they're getting. I'm just going to set her off playing whilst I explain a little bit more, because no one actually understands the word she's saying because she's South
같이
Korean.
웃고 싶은 방송 써니의 밴데이트
And
3부
basically
시작했습니다.
this whole like
9031님이 오늘 캡티서 보려고 월화수목 야근했어요.
and
7783님 캡티서가 왔는데 배터리가
basically they kind of like praise the radio the same way we praise TV, and they don't actually use the internet as a form of entertainment. In Korea, they don't sit there and scroll through YouTube for hours and hours and hours, and they don't use iTunes as a source of music. They use TV or radio, and it's an odd way to think about it like that, because I wouldn't do that. I would sit through YouTube and scroll for hours and hours watching millions of different YouTube videos and things like that. This whole live stream of radio broadcast is actually so successful that Samsung paid a radio station that I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the name of £250,000 to put banners up in the background. So this was obviously taken beforehand, because otherwise in the back of her head would be a massive Samsung Galaxy Note 4. But and it's like huge. Like if you're not doing anything else, you can just turn this on. You can watch radio get presented, and they don't. When they cut to ad breaks and they play songs and stuff, you don't cut the music out and then you hear what they're talking about, because there you go. There's your example.
서면 기흥역이 딱 보이니까 GTS 개통 시 강남 수서역까지 딱 4점.
So they cut all of the audio. The cameras in there don't have microphones in them at all. So all you hear is what's being broadcasted out on the radio, and it's really odd. Like working in a radio station is not that interesting. So I don't get why you'd want to watch someone present the radio. But hey, it's a completely different culture and a different way of thinking about it. And to be honest, radio seems to take a massive dive in this country with the introduction of DAB. Now, South Korea doesn't have DAB, digital radio, so would it be interesting to see if we introduced it, would listenership go down like it did over here? I think that would be something that might be worth looking into. Now, before I did this, because I don't really listen to the radio, I'm sat here thinking, I don't need radio anymore. I've got the news streamed to my phone, I've got music playing out of every single digital surface that I have. Why do I need the radio anymore? And to be honest, my opinion hasn't changed. In the first world, we don't really rely on the radio for anything anymore. Maybe listening to the radio for traffic updates, but 9 times out of 10, you're stuck in that traffic jam you've just mentioned and there's no way off of it. So, at this point, yeah, broadcasted radio is useful in some countries like South Africa and in other third world countries. But here in the first world, I think we could probably go without it. I think that is probably a safe bet. I think a lot of people would be upset, but I think they're also of the older generations. People that grew up with the radio on all the time. People that, you know, rely on the radio as a form of entertainment. For me, I know I could probably go the rest of my life without ever hearing a radio ever again, and I probably wouldn't consider it a huge loss. But, hey, that's my opinion.
Okay.
Any questions?
Go, Daryl.
You know how you said you'd never listen to a radio kind of thing? What would you say if you were in your car or something like that? You didn't, you know, you forgot your phone, blah blah blah. What would you listen to?
Well, in my car there is always those 3 albums. They never leave. I have 2 copies of those albums because they never leave the car.
Yeah, but what I'm saying if you didn't have them.
Oh no, I do occasionally, because I listen to Real XS, but that only goes so far. I think you get halfway down with it pass and then it cuts out. So.
Anyone else got any questions? So I would worry if you got rid of broadcast radio, although I see what you're saying, you're losing that spontaneity, aren't you, of maybe hearing something unexpected, or and I think as much as there is obviously a good argument for saying that you can access anything you want at any time, maybe it's a good thing to have that suggestion, someone playing something that maybe you've not heard. And a lot of the models, I would argue as well, for these kind of streaming sites are kind of built around that, this idea of suggesting music to you based on what you're interested in.
Yeah.
That's almost following like a radio type model, isn't it, I would say. Okay, anything else? No? No? Go down.
Wouldn't you like to know what his cars in the traffic and that?
I really don't care. Because I don't use because I don't listen to the radio in my car. I use my phone as like if my mum doesn't know where she's going, she's like, bring Google navigation up. And because it always navigates me away from traffic, I never really worry about it anymore.
I mean, if God forbid you did end up in charge of the country and you did make that decision to get rid of radio, you did say earlier on about you wonder if it's an age thing. So maybe in 5 or 10 years' time, maybe you will think, oh, I'd quite like to listen to the radio actually.
Maybe.
Maybe it is an age thing, but we'll see. Okay, well done. Thank you very much.